My husband actually called the police on our own daughter after her gift to me on my 60th birthday. And no, this isn't some kind of joke. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. I never imagined that sentence would come out of my mouth, but that's exactly what happened. My name is Elaine, I just turned 60, and I've been married to Robert for 35 years. We've shared a life that on the outside looked stable. Nice house, steady routines, one beautiful daughter, Mara, who is now 34. But if you scratched beneath the surface, there were cracks that I'd spent decades pretending weren't there. Robert always liked to be in control. He decided how the money was spent, what vacations we took, and even which friends we should or shouldn't see. He thrived on being the one people pointed to as the provider, the strong, reliable husband. But behind closed doors, he belittled me constantly. Every idea I had was silly. Every effort Mara made was overdone. And yet, I told myself this was just his personality, that maybe it wasn't worth the fight. Mara grew up watching it all. I thought I was shielding her from Robert's dismissiveness, but children see more than we realize. Whenever I tried to step in for her, whether that was helping with school projects, paying for extra lessons, or just letting her cry on my shoulder, Robert accused me of spoiling her. He always wanted to be the one with authority, the one with the final word. So when my 60th birthday rolled around, Mara went out of her way to make it special. She cooked a beautiful meal, filled the house with warmth and little touches that reminded me how deeply she knew me. There was no grand spectacle, no flashy expense, just love and effort in every detail. For the first time in years, I felt like this milestone might actually be joyful, something to remember with a full heart. Robert showed up, of course, but his energy was off from the beginning. He tossed out sarcastic comments, like it was ridiculous to go all out for a birthday. When Mara raised a glass to toast me, speaking about the sacrifices I'd made for her and the lessons she carried into adulthood, I saw him smirk instead of clap. Still, I told myself to let it go. It was my day, and I wanted to focus on the love in the room. Then came the moment that changed everything, the gift. Mara handed me a box, wrapped neatly, her eyes shining with excitement. "Mom," she said, "I've been working on this for years. You deserve to see what you've done for me." Inside wasn't jewelry or some expensive gadget. It was a scrapbook, letters, photos, receipts, little fragments of our life together. Each page told a story of the ways I'd quietly supported her when Robert turned his back. As I flipped through it, tears rolled down my cheeks. I thought it was the most beautiful gift a mother could ever receive. But across the table, Robert's face hardened. And in that moment, I had no idea how far he'd go to turn what should have been my happiest birthday into a nightmare. Looking back, I realized my marriage had always been lopsided, though I didn't admit it until much later. Robert had this need to be the one in charge of everything. From what car we bought to what color the living room walls should be, his voice carried the final say. Money was the biggest arena where he flexed his authority. He prided himself on being the earner, the one who kept the family afloat. Yet any contribution I made, whether from a part-time job or savings, was brushed off like it didn't matter. It wasn't just about finances either. He wanted his stamp on every corner of our lives. When Mara was little, I tried to shield her from that controlling streak. If she wanted piano lessons or a new book for school, I found a way to make it happen. Sometimes I dipped into what little I had tucked away. Robert framed it as me undermining him, insisting I was raising her to be dependent, or worse, ungrateful. I told myself it was better to let his words roll off me, but Mara was sharper than I gave her credit for. She caught the looks, the sighs, the way he dismissed us both like we were background noise to his role as head of the house. Robert thrived on appearances. At family gatherings, he loved to play the doting father and supportive husband. People saw a man who had everything under control, but what they didn't see was the way he'd cut down our ideas in private. If I suggested a trip, he'd say it was impractical. If Mara showed him something she had worked hard on, he'd find a flaw before he found a compliment. Slowly, that pattern chipped away at both of us. I used to think Mara might resent me for not standing up louder, but instead she learned to lean on me in quiet ways. We built our own kind of language, a look across the table, a late-night talk in her room, where she knew I was on her side, even if Robert wasn't. Still, his words left marks. Being told repeatedly that I spoiled her made me question whether I was doing right by my daughter. But deep down, I knew the truth. What he called spoiling was simply giving her the love and encouragement he withheld. Over time, Those small battles shaped the atmosphere of our home. It wasn't explosive, not in the way people imagine arguments to be. It was more like an invisible net, Robert pulling the strings while Mara and I tried to breathe underneath it. And as much as I tried to ignore it, those fault lines never went away. They only grew deeper with every year we spent under the same roof. The evening of my birthday arrived, and Mara insisted on handling everything herself. She wanted the celebration to feel personal, so she planned it at her place rather than a restaurant or rented hall. The table was set with care, candles flickering softly, flowers in a vase that she'd chosen because she knew they were my favorite. The smell of her cooking filled the room, a mix of roasted vegetables, herbs, and the lemon cake she had baked from scratch. Every detail reminded me of how much thought she had poured into the night. When I walked in, my chest tightened with emotion. There weren't crowds of people or flashy decorations, just intimacy, warmth, and love. Mara greeted me with a hug that lasted longer than usual, and in her eyes I could see how much this day meant to her as well. She wanted to honor me, not with extravagance, but with effort, the kind that can't be bought. I couldn't stop smiling, touched beyond words by how carefully she'd pulled it all together. Robert arrived a little later, and his presence shifted the atmosphere. Where Mara's energy was light and joyful, his was flat, almost irritated. He glanced at the decorations and let out a half-laugh, muttering about how, it's just a birthday, not a wedding. Mara ignored the jab, determined not to let him drag the mood down, and I tried to brush it off as well, though I felt a pang that he couldn't even pretend to be supportive. As the evening went on, Mara served each dish with pride, checking to make sure I was enjoying everything. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was simply her way of showing gratitude. I sat there, feeling cherished, realizing how rare it was to have a moment that was about me, free of Robert's constant control. It felt like a gift in itself. Then Mara raised her glass, and the room grew quiet. She looked directly at me, her voice steady but emotional. She spoke about the ways I had shaped her life, not through money or status, but through sacrifices that no one else ever saw. Late nights helping with homework, gentle words when she doubted herself, the way I always seemed to know what she needed before she said a word. Hearing her gratitude poured into words like that left me overwhelmed, fighting back tears. I glanced toward Robert, hoping he might at least acknowledge her gesture, but instead he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, with that smirk I knew too well. He didn't clap, didn't raise his glass, just sat there with an expression that cheapened the moment. It stung, not only because it was meant to honor me, but because Mara had opened her heart so sincerely. In that instant, I realized how much brighter my daughter's love was compared to the shadow her father insisted on casting. After the plates were cleared and the candles burned low, Mara disappeared into the other room for a moment. When she returned, she was holding a box wrapped in simple paper, tied neatly with a ribbon. She set it down in front of me and smiled in that quiet, knowing way she has. "Mom," she said softly, "I've been working on this for years. You deserve to see what you've done for me." My hands trembled as I pulled at the ribbon, curious and touched already by her thoughtfulness. Inside was not jewelry or anything extravagant. Instead, it was something far more personal, a thick folder crafted with care, pages organized and decorated with little notes. As I opened it, I realized it wasn't just a scrapbook, it was a record of our journey together. The first page held a letter written in her handwriting, thanking me for always finding a way to keep her supplied with what she needed for school, even during lean times. Tucked alongside it was an old receipt for notebooks and pencils, things I had bought without telling Robert, stretching what little money I had of my own. The next section held photos from different chapters of her life. Her first science fair, prom night, moments I thought had passed quietly into memory. Next to each image, she had written a small caption, reminding me of the things I did that no one else noticed. There were notes about nights I sat awake with her after heartbreaks, how I listened without judgment and offered comfort when her world felt heavy. And in between those memories, I found documents that stunned me. Tuition statements, partially covered by my inheritance, proof of the times I had stepped in when Robert had turned away. She had saved it all, every scrap of evidence that I had tried to protect her when it mattered most. By the time I reached the last page, my vision blurred with tears. Mara had written across the bottom, "This is the story of my life, written through your love." It was the most powerful gift I had ever received. Every page felt like a mirror, reflecting back the years I thought had slipped by unnoticed. To know that she saw, remembered, and cherished it, that was beyond anything material. I looked up, overwhelmed, unable to speak. My daughter's eyes were shining, her face full of pride, as if she'd finally been able to give me something equal to what I had given her. I wanted to hold her right then, to thank her for giving me such a treasure. But before I could, I caught sight of Robert. He hadn't said a word. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid, his eyes locked on the folder with something colder than disapproval. He wasn't moved, not touched, he was glaring. In that heavy silence, I realized joy and anger were colliding in the same room, and the night had just taken a turn I hadn't expected. The air in the room shifted the moment Mara's gift landed in my lap. What should have been a tender moment between mother and daughter twisted sharply when Robert's voice cut through the quiet. His tone was sharp, almost venomous, as he accused Mara of staging the entire thing to sway me. He didn't see a daughter honoring her mom, he saw a scheme. "This is nothing but manipulation," he barked, his glare bouncing between us. "You're trying to use feelings as leverage." Mara froze, stunned, her hands still resting on the edge of the scrapbook. I felt my own stomach knot, the joy of the evening replaced with a familiar heaviness. Robert leaned forward, his voice growing louder, demanding answers that no one had invited him to ask. "Where did you even get the money for all this?" he snapped at me, his suspicion dripping with contempt. To him, it wasn't enough that Mara's words were heartfelt. He needed to tear apart the foundation behind them, to search for betrayal where there was none. I steadied myself, unwilling to let his accusations spiral. "It was mine," I told him, keeping my voice calm even as my heart raced. "Not ours. Mine. From what was left to me years ago. From what I managed to save." I wanted him to hear the truth, that I had never taken from him, never stolen a cent. But Robert's face didn't soften. If anything, his anger deepened, like the explanation was an insult rather than clarity. Mara tried to speak, her voice tentative, but he cut her off with a wave of his hand, as though her words had no place in his world. His focus stayed locked on me, eyes sharp, mouth set in a hard line. In his mind, the fact that I had acted independently was worse than anything Mara could have presented. The idea that I had carved out space without his knowledge was enough to ignite his temper into a blaze. Then, without warning, he shoved his chair back, the sound screeching against the floor. He muttered something low, the kind of words meant to sting without being fully heard, before moving toward the door. "This isn't over," he spat, the threat hanging heavy in the air. And just like that, he was gone, leaving behind silence broken only by the crackle of candles and the thud of my heartbeat. Mara looked at me with wide, wounded eyes, guilt flickering across her face as if she had somehow caused the eruption. I reached for her hand, trying to assure her she had done nothing wrong. The evening that had begun with warmth and love now ended with a shadow cast long across it, Robert's anger trailing behind him like storm clouds refusing to clear. It was a quiet afternoon when the knock came, sharp and insistent, echoing through the house. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch. For a moment I thought there must be some mistake, maybe they had the wrong address. But then one of them asked for me by name, their expression serious. My stomach dropped before I even heard why they were there. They explained they were following up on a report, something involving money, deception, and my daughter. The words blurred in my ears: fraud, concealment, investigation. I felt dizzy, gripping the doorframe as neighbors began to peek from their windows, drawn by the sight of police at my doorstep. I could almost hear the whispers forming, their curiosity pressing against my back as I stood frozen in place. Mara had come over that morning, and she appeared behind me in the doorway, confusion etched on her face. The officers turned to her, their questions sharp, formal, almost rehearsed. They spoke as though she were a suspect rather than my child, asking about accounts, transfers, and whether she had pressured me into providing funds. Each question cut deeper, painting her as someone dishonest. I couldn't reconcile the picture they were trying to draw with the woman standing beside me, the same daughter who had spent years working hard to build her life honestly. It became clear who had set this in motion. Robert's shadow loomed over every word the officers repeated. He had crafted a version of events where Mara was the manipulator, and I was too naive to see it. In his story, she had conned me, and I had secretly hidden money that was rightfully his. The cruelty of it stole my breath. Not only was he attacking me, but he was branding his own daughter a criminal. As the conversation dragged on, shame burned through me. I had lived with Robert's control for decades, but never had I imagined he would weaponize the law against us. Standing there, I felt both exposed and foolish. All those years of ignoring the warning signs, telling myself his temper was just bluster, had led to this scene on my front porch. Officers questioning my child while neighbors watched like it was some twisted performance. Mara's voice stayed steady, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. She answered firmly, refusing to let the accusations shake her. Still, I could feel her pain. Being treated as though she had deceived me was a betrayal no daughter should ever endure, especially from her own father. When the officers finally left, promising to follow up, I closed the door and leaned against it, trembling. My heart ached not just from the humiliation, but from the realization that Robert wasn't content with anger. He wanted to destroy the bond between Mara and me entirely. And in that moment, I knew he had crossed a line there was no coming back from. After the incident with the police, I knew I couldn't let things slide anymore. The shock had worn off, and in its place was a determination I hadn't felt in years. I made an appointment with a lawyer, unsure of what I'd even find, but certain that Robert's accusations couldn't be the whole truth. Sitting across from a professional, I laid out everything I knew, every detail about how our finances had been handled. The investigation didn't take long to unravel the picture Robert had tried so hard to paint. One by one, hidden pieces of our life surfaced. Bank accounts I had never seen, transfers tucked away, funds funneled under names I didn't recognize. It turned out Robert had been moving money for years, siphoning from what we shared and disguising it as routine expenses. The numbers were staggering, but what cut deepest wasn't the total. It was the deceit threaded through decades of our marriage. For years he had berated me, calling me careless or untrustworthy whenever I questioned his decisions. He had claimed that I was the one being secretive, that I was undermining him by keeping small savings aside. All the while, he had been the one quietly stripping away what was meant for our family's security. The authority he lorded over me, the control he exercised like it was his birthright, rested on a foundation of dishonesty. When I shared the findings with Mara, she wasn't surprised. She listened carefully, her face calm, though I could see sadness flickering in her eyes. "Mom," she said gently, "I've always known he treated us unfairly. You gave, and he made you feel guilty for it. This just proves what we felt all along." Her words weren't bitter. They were steady, almost comforting. For the first time, I realized she had carried this awareness for years, silently witnessing what I had tried to downplay. The clarity was both painful and freeing. I had spent so long convincing myself Robert's dominance was a strength, that his insistence on control was a sign of stability. But now I could see it clearly. It wasn't strength, it was deception. He had cloaked himself in the image of the provider while secretly hoarding for himself, leaving me and Mara to shoulder the weight of his arrogance. That night, I sat with the documents spread across the table, each page a piece of evidence, each line a reminder of how deep the lies went. The realization settled over me with a heaviness I couldn't ignore. The man I had built my life with hadn't just betrayed me in the moment. He had built our entire marriage on falsehoods. And for the first time, instead of feeling powerless, I felt the stirrings of resolve. The truth was finally out, and I wasn't going to let him bury it again. I spread the papers across my dining table, my hands trembling as I tried to make sense of everything Robert had hidden from me. Mara sat across from me with her laptop, pulling files, highlighting details, and pointing out transfers I never even knew existed. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this fight. My daughter was right there with me, helping me see the truth piece by piece. I stared at the bank records, the property documents, the signatures I recognized as his, and it felt like a knife twisting deeper the more I read. He had been preparing for this for years, making sure I would be left with nothing, making sure Mara was cut out completely. "Mom," Mara whispered, sliding a folder toward me. "You need to see this." I opened it, and my stomach dropped. It was his will. Line after line, I searched for Mara's name, something, anything, but it wasn't there. Instead, everything was listed under his estranged brother, a man who had never once been part of our lives. He wasn't just trying to erase Mara. He was trying to erase me too. Anger rose inside me, but this time it didn't consume me, it steadied me. For so long, I believed Robert's lectures about loyalty, trust, and obedience. But sitting there, holding the proof of his lies, I finally saw it clearly. His authority wasn't real. It was nothing but control dressed up as love. Mara reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "He's been unfair to us for years, Mom. But we don't have to let him keep winning." Her words settled deep inside me, giving me strength I didn't know I had left. I looked at her, then back at the documents, and something shifted. I wasn't scared anymore. With every page, I felt more determined. We organized the evidence into binders, labeling each detail, building our case step by step. I could already picture the look on Robert's face when his empire of lies collapsed. For the first time in decades, I wasn't the woman he had made me out to be. I was ready to fight, and this time, I wasn't backing down. I invited Robert to the house under the pretense of a conversation about the family, but I already knew this would be more than talk. When he arrived, I led him to the dining room, where Mara and I had arranged the binders, spreadsheets, and documents neatly across the table. The scene mirrored the moment she had given me the scrapbook, organized, intentional, impossible to ignore. Robert's expression twisted as he took it in, his usual calm slipping into tension. I watched him carefully, feeling a quiet power I hadn't felt in decades. He tried to assert himself immediately, leaning forward, his voice low and threatening, attempting the same intimidation tactics he had used countless times in the past. But this time there was no fear in me, no hesitation. Mara stood beside me, her presence a silent reinforcement of our unity. I spoke first, laying out the facts clearly, page by page, showing him the hidden accounts, the transfers, the evidence of the will that cut Mara out entirely. I saw his face tighten as the truth became undeniable, his attempts to dominate failing against the sheer weight of reality. Mara stepped forward then, her voice strong and unwavering. "You spent years trying to erase Mom's love," she said, looking him directly in the eyes. "You'll never erase me." Her words hit harder than anything I could have imagined, and I could see the realization flicker across his face. His control, which had been his greatest weapon for so long, was gone. The power he had wielded over our lives, our emotions, our actions, our choices, had evaporated in the face of truth and solidarity. For the first time, I felt a liberation I hadn't thought possible. Mara and I didn't just stand together. We stood above the lies and manipulation that had defined so many years of our lives. Robert tried to argue, tried to regain his footing, but his words sounded hollow. Every threat, every attempt to intimidate, fell flat against the reality we had uncovered and the bond we shared. I could see it in his eyes. He knew he had lost. The tension in the room shifted from fear to empowerment. Mara and I exchanged a look. No words were needed. We had taken back what was ours, our peace, our dignity, our future. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't realized before. The real power had always been with us. After everything, the relief was almost surreal. The authorities confirmed that Mara and I had done nothing wrong, and instead, Robert became the subject of scrutiny for his hidden accounts and financial misconduct. It was a bitter irony. He had tried to ruin us, yet the law now shone a light on his own misdeeds. I filed for divorce, a decision I had hesitated over for years, but now it felt like liberation rather than loss. At 60, I was stepping into a chapter of life defined not by fear or control, but by choice. Mara stayed close, her presence a comforting reminder that I wasn't navigating this new path alone. One evening, as we sorted through the remnants of the confrontation, Mara smiled at me gently. "Mom," she said, "the scrapbook wasn't the gift. It was showing you what you already had, your strength." I paused, letting her words sink in. For so long, I had measured myself against Robert's expectations, doubting my own instincts and worth. Now I finally saw the truth. Tears streamed down my face, but they were different this time, soft, liberating, and full of gratitude. Mara had given me more than memories. She had given me freedom, clarity, and a renewed sense of self. In that quiet moment, I realized my daughter's love had not only celebrated my past, but had also carved a space for the life I deserved moving forward. Do you think I did the right thing by standing up to Robert and filing for divorce, or should I have tried to give him another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.